Hello everyone, welcome back to the True North podcast. I'm your host, Benedict Rhodes. On Monday night, the 2023-24 NHL season wrapped up with Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Edmonton Oilers and Florida Panthers. After being down 3-0 in the series, the Oilers nearly pulled off what would have been one of the most impressive comebacks in professional sports history, but fell just short at the final hurdle. Joining me today is a good friend and colleague of mine, Sahota, who also happens to be the biggest Oilers fan I know. We'll dive into the season and playoffs that just wrapped up, and dive into some of the major stories from last season and the upcoming offseason. Hope you enjoy this discussion. Tej, thanks for taking time to do this.
It's my pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me.
You've had a couple of days now to kind of reflect on the end of the season, and I know losing Game 7 sucks, of course, but how do you maybe look back on the playoffs as a whole and how things kind of ended up shaking out in Edmonton?
You know what? Look, it's funny. The night of, I think I was probably despondent, as any fan would be, right? You're very much a victim of the immediate circumstance, and like looking back the next day, though, it was just kind of like, listen, it was 2 months and 2 days of an extra season essentially. The adventure started for the Oilers on April 22nd and ended on June 24th. And it was kind of like, look, I got to watch hockey on the last possible day that there was going to be hockey. And so looking back on it, it was just, you got to kind of enjoyed the ride a little bit more. And so I was retrospectively able to look back and say, yeah, you know what? That was a great adventure. And I was thankful to the team to take me on it. So, and a couple of days have passed now, the second and third day, I'm kind of much more okay, itching now. I'm over the despondency of what happened, and I'm itching now to go. It's only 89 days until it's literally only 89 days till the Oilers play their first exhibition game for the next season. I'm like, all right, let's get rolling again. I'm excited. So I'm looking back at it. It was a fun ride, and I was happy to be a part of it.
And the Oilers made it to the Stanley Cup final, I think, about 15 years ago. How does maybe this one compare to that one in terms of from the fan experience?
Yeah, so in 2006, I remember that fondly. Ben, heck, you could, if you wanted to, we could go back and talk about some of even the earlier runs. I do have some memories of that too. That's how old I am. Uh, but 2006 was this like really weird Cinderella run. The team finished, gosh, I think they were the eighth seed. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure they were. But it felt like kind of this like sudden influx. Like in 2005, we were not a good team, and then in that summer, they grabbed Chris Pronger. At the trade deadline, I think they grabbed Dwayne Rollison. There was Michael Pekka, but there was a bunch of like 1 year mercenaries. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like it wasn't a team that like I had like slowly grown with, had seen like develop, watched them go step by step. So it was kind of like it just kind of popped up on you. And so it was like a very much like a Cinderella run. I wasn't expecting anything. There was no expectations. But with this run, this is a lot different because we had just 2 years ago, now we were at the Western Conference Finals with Colorado, and then Colorado won on the Stanley Cup. Okay. The next year we went to the second round and lost to Vegas, but then you could rationalize it that Vegas went on and won the cup. So 2 years in a row, we only lost to the team that went on to win the Stanley Cup, and you could see the team trending the right way. I think there was a lot more connection because the cornerstones, Connor, Leon, Darnell Nurse, Ryan McLeod, Dylan Holloway, a lot, Evan Bouchard, a lot, Stuart Skinner. A lot of these are homegrown players. They're all drafted, and so there was a lot more connection to the core of this team, and it kind of felt like a slow, gradual step, like we'd slowly gotten to where we needed to be. So this ride felt a lot more emotional, whereas 2006, I remember thinking of it as being, we're playing with house money. Like no one, I didn't think we'd make the playoffs, and all of a sudden we're in the Stanley Cup final. So that one felt like a lot more of like a magical run. And when that game 7 ended, you were kind of easier to tolerate or easier to stomach because it just felt like, okay, we overachieved. Whereas this feels a little bit more like unfinished business left on the table. You know what I mean?
And the big story, of course, with this Stanley Cup final was, being down 3-0 and coming back all the way to Game 7. Going down 3-0 and then winning Game 4. Did you think they still had a chance, or was it kind of just delaying the inevitable a little bit for you?
Very interesting. When they were down 3-0, a friend of mine from Edmonton texted me and said the Oilers have never under coach Knobloch, they've never gone on a 4-game losing streak, and they've answered every 3-game losing streak with a minimum of a 5-game win streak. And I thought, oh, okay, then this is setting up perfectly for us. And I don't know if actually you're an NBA fan, so you do remember this. But that Sunday, the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics played, and the Mavs won. I think they blew them out by like 20 points or something like that. And everybody said, okay, they're delaying the inevitable. And then on Monday, people were saying, well, hopefully maybe Edmonton can delay the inevitable. And then they won 8-1. And it felt very parallel to the Boston Dallas series. How I honestly will tell you, and I think even on Twitter I was saying this, was it didn't feel like they were delaying the inevitable because it really felt like they had figured something out. That there was a sudden thing, and everybody alludes to that. Gretzky's very simple comment during the intermission, talking to Kevin Bieksa, going, they need to go blocker high. They're shooting way too much glove, and I just Wayne's got such an amazing talent to simplify it, make it sound so simple. And when they scored their goals against Bobrovsky, I remember going, "Oh my God, I think they figured it out." And the 8-1, yes, it was probably a bit what they call the score effects. I think Florida stopped playing a little bit and kind of waved the white flag, but I didn't think it was delaying the inevitable. I thought that a tide had turned. Now, I thought they'd probably steal one more, but I definitely didn't think it was going to Game 7. To be honest with you.
And you mentioned number 99 there, Wayne Gretzky. The current team, of course, is number 97, Connor McDavid. And well, of course, it's fair to say when he's on the ice and playing as well as he can, the Oilers always have a chance. And I think he had 42 points in these playoffs, which would have been higher than some regular season team's highest score, which was just crazy to think about as well. But maybe game 6 and 7 aside, how special was it to watch him in these playoffs and ultimately win the Conn Smythe, which is pretty rare for a player on the losing team?
Yeah, it really is. I think it's less than a handful of times here. This is where we would probably need the Martin Bailey trademark stats to know exactly what had happened. But last one I remember is J.S. Shagir in the Anaheim loss. Listen, to me, there's a great quote where I think it's 2015. The Cavaliers are down 2-1, and LeBron says, the reporter says, at this point, do you feel like you're out of it? And he says, no. And the reporter says, and what makes you believe that you're not out of it? He says, a team with LeBron James is never out of it. There's LeBron James answer. And yeah, it's probably a little cocky, but it's very true. And I think I know hockey's different, and LeBron can dictate the flow of play a lot differently than McDavid can. And McDavid also has Draisaitl, who, in my opinion, is a top 5 player in the league alongside with him. But it really felt like, okay, as long as you have 97 and 29, like it's in the thing in poker, it's a chip in a chair, which always gives you a chance. And that's what it felt like. It's like, okay, we may need to ride them 30 minutes a game. We may need to ride them 35. But watching 97, I thought was, as long as he's out there and skating, I thought we had a chance. And it proved to be true. Yeah, game 6 and 7 aside, which I don't know if you saw the news, but he's playing with an abdominal injury, which is probably going off to surgery. 29 is playing with a injury that's going off to surgery, as well as a broken finger. So, not to make excuses, but I think they were banged up, and that explains a lot. But I was always of the opinion, as long as you have those two on the ice together, you have a chance. And it reminds me of that meme that kind of originated on the internet, which I'm sure you've seen, as I think they lost 6-2 to Carolina out in November, and they kind of just give each other like a little dab on the shoulder, like, "Hey, bud, it'll be all right." And it's like, it's true. As long as the two of them are out there, I think the team always has a chance. And so even when we were down 3-0, I said, okay, unless both of them are injured and banged up and not showing up for Game 5 or 4, we always have a chance.
And I know you posted this, and a few people have as well, where your best players have to be your best players. And I know there was some
Hmm.
minor injuries, but how important was that in this series? But also the depth of the Oilers came up pretty big with like guys like Warren Fogle and those guys played pretty big roles
Yeah,
all season long.
yeah, I think they did, and I think we overachieved on the third line. To be quite frank, Ben, Ryan McLeod, I thought played really well after having kind of been yanked in and out of the lineup. Warren Fogle was yanked in and out of the lineup. He played great. Um, Connor Brown and Matthias Janmark, I think, saved a couple of games there. There was the Oilers' penalty kill ended up with 4 goals allowed and 3 shorties. So in 67, I think 67 playoff chances, they only allowed one extra plus. There were a -1. I think that's an incredible stat, and a lot of that goes to Janmark and Brown. I thought they overachieved. Again, the other two guys achieved. I thought Dylan Holloway had a pretty decent coming out party. A lot of people won't remember, but he's been playing with an wrist surgery, so he lost about 2 years and is just starting to get his pace back. They did everything that they were supposed to do, and I'll stick with the original statement that your best players have to be your best players. And I know sometimes in hockey that players say, "Oh, fans get on each other. Oh, well, you guys we get on Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews, but how about Nick Robertson or sorry, whoever the fourth line is for Toronto?" But I always say, okay, look, there's a reason that the top guys make $12 million and the bottom guys. I have different expectations of the $12 million players than I do of the $1 million players, and so I thought the bottom six did everything that they were supposed to do. It was a little disappointing to see 97 and 29 be quiet in game 6 and 7. I think if they're maybe not as injured, it's a different story. But that's probably retrospective analysis on my part. That being said, yeah, immensely proud of what the third and fourth line brought for the Oilers. A lot of criticism for years had been it's a two-player hockey team. This team only goes so far as 97 and 29 can carry them. And yeah, you can see that in game 7 that turned out to be true, but they're not where they are. They're not coming back from a 3-0 deficit had it not been for how much depth there was on this team. And I know Ken Holland is maligned, probably by me and my Twitter account as much as anybody else. But I think that's a feather in his cap. He built a pretty decently deep team. Adam Henrique as a trade deadline acquisition, I thought was fantastic. It can be moved from center to wing, so I was very impressed with that. And hats off to the bottom six. They did their job.
And a lot of those guys you just mentioned, Myanmar, Fogel, Henrique, Brown, they're all unrestricted free agents this offseason. How much do you want to see Ken Holland trying to retain some of these guys, and how much do you want to just maybe think it's time to shake up things a little bit as well?
I think it's time to shake things up. I'll go straight to it, Ben. I think it's time to shake things up. Um, I was just reading on The Athletic in Daniel Nugent Brown's column. We're actually the second oldest team in the league. I think it's a little bit skewed because some of the players are really older on there, but we're an older team. There's not a lot of youth available, and unfortunately, there's not a lot coming up in the pipeline as well. So I think and just to be sure, Ken Holland's last day as general manager was today, so I think he's moved off now. Jeff Jackson, who's assuming the role of CEO and president of hockey operations, will be the de facto general manager through the next couple of days. I think his job has gotten immensely difficult because Warren Fogle, I think, has priced himself off of the Oilers. He's at best a third line winger who's not able to really make more impact than that. But my guess is that some team out there is going to be able to pay him a lot more money than what he was earning this year. And I just don't think the Oilers have the affordability to match him. I think the bigger handcuff is that you got to figure out Evan Bouchard's extension. You got to figure out Leon Draisaitl's extension. You got to leave some money on the till for Connor McDavid's extension because he's up in 2 years as well too. So whatever you do now has to be really, really smart money. And I think Warren Fogle gets himself priced out. I also think that Dylan Holloway allows us to do that because his emergence will probably mean that a player like Warren Fogle can be replaced on the cheap. The player that I would like to see back from there is Matthias Janmark. I think the penalty kill is going to be the strength of this team. I think Connor Brown is a realistic possibility because the Oilers signed him to a very interesting deal where he got $3.5 million in bonuses that fall into this year's salary cap. So hopefully there's not a hometown discount, but a discount there that he's willing to provide to stay with playing with Connor McDavid there. But beyond that, I think there's going to have to be a shakeup of youth. How they get there, I have some ideas, and we can definitely talk about that if you want. But I think they have to get into the youth a lot more.
And not to make everything about Toronto, I know that's kind of a thing that people always say, but you've seen the Leafs kind of handcuff themselves the last few years, giving $40 million to four players.
Yep.
How important is it to avoid doing that with this team? Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl is on 8.5 million right now, and that's pretty team friendly, I'd say. And how important is it to maybe take advantage of this year while he's still on that salary and not before he goes for 14, 15?
Yeah, well, and I think I just saw Pierre. Was it Pierre LeBrun? I think it was, or sorry, Craig Button on TSN said that he expects Leon Draisaitl's contract to go up to 14.5 million. Um, Look, I think Leon Draisaitl's in the same conversation as Connor McDavid, excluded, but he's in that next tier with Nathan McKinnon, Austin Matthews, and Cale Makar. I think that's a five. I know we've spoken in our WhatsApp chat group about, and it's the rare time that all five or six of us in that chat agree. There's usually never, I think that's the um, unequivocal top five, and it's nice to know that Kevin Bieksa agrees with us, right, Ben? So
He's
I
my
think
guy.
that's the top. I think that's the top five in the league, and I think he probably should be paid commensurate. But if we're comparing it to the Leafs, I think the issue is that this is two guys making top money, whereas the Leafs have four guys in that forward group making that above 10 and 11. So there's probably a little bit more wiggle room. The other opposite issue is that you don't have anybody in Toronto making Darnell Nurse money, and I think at 9.25, Darnell Nurse is overpaid by probably about $5 million. To be quite frank with you, I think he's about a $4.5 to $5 million player. He's not worth more valuable than Matthias Ekholm. I think Matthias Ekholm is the best defenseman on that team, and he's coming in at 5.25. I want to say something like that. Zach Hyman is a steal of a deal at 5.25 of a cap hit. So, and Ryan Nugent Hopkins is the same way. So, it's going to be interesting. I think Connor and Leon have a decision to make as well too. Connor left some money on the table last time. It wasn't much, but it was about $1 million. I think that he took less. But that $1 million is the difference between you being able to get an Adam Henrique at the trade deadline versus you being able to be handcuffed. Now, if Connor and Leon want to take their maximum at 14 and a half and tie up almost $30 million, it's within their right. But if they're willing to drop down to being about a combined 25 to $26 million hit, that extra $4 million probably allows the Oilers to upgrade on that Cody Ceci position or the Brett Kulak position, and then also be able to retain all their free agents. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of days to see what the extensions look like. I am worried that if they do max out, you're probably looking at a team that peters out a lot quicker because the back end of the roster is going to have to be filled with AHL caliber guys, essentially.
You mentioned one guy there, Zach Hyman. I think it was a revelation this year. Scored 50 goals for the first time in his career, and
Yep.
other than his father having deep pockets, what do you think made him so effective this year and sort of establish himself as one of the top scoring forwards in the league after maybe previously being more of a sort of high end role player?
Yeah, I really loved his first season. I really loved his last season with the Oilers, which wasn't a 54 goal scorer, but he was still a very effective player. I thought he brought a certain edge of power forward, grit, the net score, the goal scorer kind of in front of the net. Um, I think 54 might be a bit of an aberration. I think he probably drops back down to being a 30 goal scorer somewhere around, but I still think that's great value for what he brings. I think because playing with 97, there's going to be so many shots on net. The Oilers' power play is so lethal, and one of the reasons is because Zach Hyman occupies so much space around the net. Um, so he has been a somebody who I think, much like Leon Draisaitl, is overperformed his contract, and that's what you need, right? What we're looking for in this era of salary cap, the Moneyball era, is always finding players who outperform their contract. And he is definitely one of them. So I've been thoroughly impressed. I can't thank Kyle Dubas enough for tying his money elsewhere and freeing him up.
Yeah, I'm sure you can't. um, Going back to this past year, the Oilers started the season very poorly. I think it was 2-1 and 7. I think it was before Jay Woodcroft was fired, and I think some people thought maybe it's a bit premature. It was only 10 or 11 games into the season, but Chris Knobloch, his hiring it seemed to be a stroke of genius. What did you make of that move and how it sort of played out after he joined the team?
Yeah, I thought Jay Woodcroft was a victim of Jack Campbell's incompetence. To be quite frank with you, at the time, I thought that the issue was is that the starting goaltender was absolutely um, garbage. I and Stuart Skinner wasn't any better, and I thought Jay Woodcroft was it was the victim of that. And I thought had they just stayed with him, things would have fallen to the mean eventually, or regressed to the mean. As the season wore on, and as I read a little bit more about what the actual tactical differences were, I thought Chris Knobloch had them playing better hockey. The penalty kill under Chris Knobloch was completely revamped. I've been watching hockey since earnestly since 1987 that I can remember, and that's the most aggressive style of penalty kill. The penalty kill is usually a soft box of four skaters, two up top, two down low, and they kind of make a box to try to force shots all the way to the perimeter. Whereas Edmonton kind of reinvented the formula and was like an aggressive back checker. Like they were not giving anybody time, and I think it just really, really played with into their strengths of having a lot of speed along the wings. I thought it was really, really well done, and so Chris Knobloch gets a lot of credit for that. I think Paul Coffey, who came on as an assistant when Knobloch was hired as well, should get a lot of credit for some of the defenseman adjustments that he made, moving Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard to the top pair. I thought was a really, really good stroke of genius, matching up, some of the other players as well too. But I'm happy with Knobloch. I still think he's getting his feet wet, and I think that he had some shortcomings as a coach even in these playoffs. Um, I think one of them was the even when you could see the tide turning, his hesitancy to call a timeout just to calm things down. I think there was a few games early in the series against Vancouver and Dallas where you're just screaming at him like, stop, stem the tide somehow, do something, get Connor and Leon back out there. But to his credit, one thing that he did that Jay Woodcroft used to do a lot more of, which bothered me, was anytime Edmonton Oilers coaches fall into panic mode, they would break their lineups and go into uniting 97 and 29. And we used to call it the McBlender because Todd McLennan used to always do that. He'd have a game plan, and the minute things didn't go well, he'd panic and put 97 and 29 together, which actually then impacted the game negatively because the other three lines couldn't do anything. And the other team would just stack up their defense against 97 and 29. What made me really happy about Chris Knobloch was how he used that only in very few cases, in icings, in power play situations, coming out of a TV timeout. He'd load them up with Zach Hyman, but then he'd get them back out onto their regular lines. And there's advanced analytics that show that that's a much more effective way of using Connor and Leon as well. Keep them on separate teams and just unite them for a power play unit. So I thought that was something that Jay Woodcroft used as a crutch far too often, and it wore out the two players. And I think that was one of Chris Knobloch's trust in the whole team. It helps that Zach Hyman became an elite scorer this year. It helps that Dylan Holloway brought a lot of speed. Um, I thought Evander Kane, for the most part, in the playoffs before his injury really took over, was really useful in that second line as well too. So, all in all, but I'm quite now retrospectively happy that they moved on to Chris Knoblauch over Jay Woodcroft.
And I don't think I've seen anyone so calm before behind an NHL bench. He seems like you could tell him, "Oh, hey, Chris, all your players just been ejected from the game," and he kind of just look at you unfazed. How impressive is that? But also, maybe what are the advantages and disadvantages of someone who's seemingly so calm all the time?
Um, I this is I coach with in basketball, and I'm always cognizant about the fact that your team takes on the coach's personality in whether it's basketball, whether it's hockey. And I don't probably do a good enough job at it, Ben. The hall will probably tell you that. Is sometimes I probably throw some clipboards around, but if you look over and your coach looks calm and steady, I think it inspires a certain amount of like, all right, no reason, he doesn't get too high after you're up 4-0, and he doesn't get too low if you're down 4-0. And I like that even keeled approach. Whereas Woodcroft did have a little bit more of fieriness in him, and I think that sometimes probably played back. So, as a fan, yeah, we as fans get like, oh my god, why is the coach not freaking out like the rest of us on Twitter, right? Like, how come oh my god, he's not um, involved into this thing? He's not showing any emotion. Clearly, he doesn't care as much as we do. And I think when you're a player, you'd much rather look back and say, okay, he's not flipping out. He's not going to blend the lines. The rest of us aren't going to get benched in favor of 97 and 29 for 10 straight minutes. Ben, it's a great question because I'm actually thinking about this now as you say this, and I look back and I go, yeah, you know what? That's a strength. It's a great strength to have, to exhibit that much calmness behind the bench. I liken it to the opposite. I think one of the most overrated coaches in the league is John Tortorella, because it works for a few shifts. Being hot and fiery, and getting on your players, and then eventually you can see it just wearing on you guys. The act, by November, December, when the games don't mean as much, like, it just wears on the players. And I think when you look at Chris Knoblauch, who's always even keel, the one day that he does snap, like, I think there's going to be a lot of faces on that bench going, "Oh shit!" Like, let's get our stuff act together here. But if you have a good game plan, if you came in, you did your homework, you studied the tape, you have a game plan, you're usually prepared for all situations. You're prepared as a coach to go up 4-0, and you're prepared to go down 4-0. And so if he knows, look, we're down 4-0, this is my game plan, I'm going to execute it now. Then why worry? Then you just you stick with your game plan, and if it doesn't work, you adjust the game plan in between games. I like coaches that say, okay, I did my work, I did my game planning. This is what I'm going to stick with tonight. If this doesn't work, we're going to rely on video. We're going to rely on the analytics. We're going to rely on the feedback from our star players. But I'm not going to start panicking here right now and getting on the players and yelling at them to motivate them, because if a coach needs to motivate the players to get their stuff together, I think that's a sign of a much more deeper problem on the team. So I'm really happy with what Knoblauch's demeanor was, and I think it's going to be a good long term solution. Plus, he's got that ready made relationship with Connor, right? That's his junior and coach from Erie. I think there's a lot of trust there, and it just leads me to believe that. Look, I know what the Edmonton players have been saying and the general manager saying, but you cannot tell me that that wasn't a Connor McDavid hire. That's as much as a Connor McDavid hire as a LeBron James and JJ Redick are attached at the hip.
And you mentioned your son there. I want to ask you about probably the most important thing in all this, which is how special was it to share that with him and the rest of your family as well, and especially in the hall where we actually went out to Edmonton for one of the games in one of the earlier rounds.
Yeah, man, it's fantastic. When you go to one of the games along the playoff run, no matter what else happens afterwards, you kind of feel like you're part of the process. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of like, yeah, I was there along for it. We were there for the ride, and so um, it was very special. And that's kind of the retrospective analysis that I was talking about. Like, it was a 2-month adventure. My dad, who doesn't watch many hockey games, but always tends to watch Oilers playoff games. We had some really special moments together. Three generations of Sahotas watching the team. I got a trip back down to Edmonton, saw some old family members. It's nice to be at the new arena. Ran into our good mutual friend Martin Bailey at one of the games. There's all these memories around there about that, and that was very special. I think the things that I remember from the 1990 run, which I remember pretty vividly, and the 2006 run, was the memories of who I was watching it with, and this was one of those most special moments as well too. Is Nahal and I, living and dying with like every shot on net, screaming over the penalty kills, begging for it. Nahal's first sport is basketball, and then soccer second. So in the middle of like, especially in this last couple of weeks, because like he 90% of his brain was dedicated towards Kylian Mbappe and France, and then like in the evenings to try to steer him back into hockey, and him going, no, Dad, it's cool, it's cool. I'm with 97 again, right? Like it was like, all right, this is cool. Like I know basketball and soccer take most of his attention, so the fact that the Oilers still had somewhat of his attention even during a Copa and a Euro run was really cool. And that's 20 years from now, yes, I'll remember that we didn't win the cup, but I'll probably remember more that I watched Game 7 with them. So that part's really special.
And before I let you go, let's finish off with a little bit of fun and a quick rapid fire round, if that's all right. We'll give you five
Yeah, let's do
questions,
this. Oh, that's always good.
five,
Yeah.
let's do 5 questions, 5 answers, and whatever comes to mind first, let's go with it. First of all, who's your favorite Oiler of all time?
Whoa, man. That is such a load. Oh, you want to make that a rapid fire question? Really, Ben? You're killing me, bro. Because I could give you like a 50-minute answer on that. Gretzky might be my favorite, one of my favorite athletes of all time. So you probably Gretzky's right up there with LeBron and Tiger Woods for me. Yeah, so Wayne Gretzky. But there's a very close second answer if you ever want to get around to that. We can talk about that someday.
Second one, who's your favorite non-Oiler of all time?
Matt Sundin.
Good one. What's your favorite hockey memory?
Oh gosh, Peter Klima scoring in 1990. It was an overtime game, um, and I can't remember any of the details, but I just remember I was in grade six watching on a black and white TV in Toronto. We had just moved from Edmonton the year previous, and I was still an Edmontonian at heart. I was still connected with the team, and I remember when that goal happened. It was like second or third overtime. It was a Hockey Night in Canada game. Um, Probably the last good time that Martin Bailey didn't cause any chaos to happen in a Canadian team. And yeah, that was one of my fondest Oiler memories. Just watching Peter Klima score in overtime, and probably second is Todd Marchand scoring against the Dallas Stars.
Next one, which player went under the radar this year for the Oilers that you think could take a big step forward next year?
Playoffs or regular season?
Anything.
I'm gonna go with playoffs, and I think Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. I'll cheat and give you two. I think both of them were the reason that this series went to 7 games. They were unheralded, and I think I'm expecting big things from both of them. I think Broberg is a top 4 defenseman on the team next year, and I think Dylan Holloway solidifies as a top 6 player.
And the last one, what is your reasonable expectation for the 2024-25 season?
I think they're a playoff team. I think they are getting into the second or third round minimum. That's a reasonable expectation. Again, you tell me my team has Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard, and some reasonable goaltending. I'm telling you that that's at least a conference finalist expectation of a team.
We could do a whole episode on the Jack Campbell fiasco, but I won't bother you too much with that. But Tej, I appreciate the time today and appreciate you jumping on the show.
Ben, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, especially I know with Paris Olympics coming around in a month and you're busy with that. And this is usually where the guest plugs his or her thing. But since I'm not really writing for Waking the Red anymore, I'd like to plug whoever's listening this in Edmonton, for any of my fellow Oilers fans, to subscribe to True North podcast, the newsletter. I think Ben does amazing work keeping Canadians informed about the Olympians that are going to be representing our country. I learned more about the newsletter through the newsletter about, heck, I didn't, in the middle of game 6, you dropped the Brooke Henderson news on us, and I was like, whoa, damn, I better get reading into this. So, for those of you who are, excited about the Paris Olympics and amateur sports, follow Ben's True North newsletter. He'll do a fantastic job of keeping you abreast of all our amateur athletes, and equally important as the Paris 24 Olympics arrive. So yeah, Ben, it's always a pleasure to talk sports with you. I'm glad we're not talking TFC, our other mutual team, because things do not look as good in that land right now. So we'll leave it at that, and instead we get a chance to talk hockey, which was a lot more fun today.
Thank you, Tej, for the kind words. Your check is in the mail. If you want to be the first person to listen to future episodes of the True North podcast and read all of my written content, subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts and at truenorthsports.substack.com. We got a ton of coverage of all things Canadian sports in the lead up to the Olympics and Paralympics this summer. You can also follow us on Twitter at TrueNorth_sport and on Instagram and TikTok at TrueNorthSport. I've been your host, Benedict Rhodes. Thank you so much for listening.